Hello and welcome everyone. Let's dive into the next episode of my bonsai series. Today's topic is air layering, both how to set one up and how to collect one that you've had growing. I'm going to use one of my Jamaican dogwoods that I just recently harvested to show you how to do that, and then later in the video I'll use my Bahamian cherry bush to show you how to start a new air layer. So let's start from success and then work backwards and see how we ended up here. So, to lay the groundwork, this is a Jamaican dogwood tree that is right on the fence line of my property. They're a native plant around in the Florida Keys, and during the spring they actually have a really nice orchid-like bloom. So that actually just happened in our yard again this year. And because we have so many big established Jamaican dogwood trees, we end up with a ton of saplings and smaller, more younger varieties of the tree that just continue to drop as seeds from the bigger ones and grow over the years. Because of their ornamental value as well as them being just so abundant in my yard, I've done my best to collect a couple and start making some bonsai trees out of the Jamaican dogwood. So earlier this spring, when I was trimming some trees back off the fence, I noticed some pretty nice ramification that was on the top of this one that was kind of crowding into our yard. So instead of trimming it right away, I decided to try to put an air layer on it and see how it would do. And after only a couple of months, it had grown enough roots to sustain itself as its own plant, so that's when the clip of me cutting it down happened. I didn't mess with the roots too much after I took them out of the plastic bag, as I was getting it repotted into the terracotta pot. And as a result, there's honestly a ton of sphagnum moss that is still sitting and clinging onto this tree. I figured I'd rather give the air layer a better chance to survive, so I'll leave this problem for a later date, where I'm sure it's going to be even more of a monumental task to actually remove all that sphagnum moss. But a good tip that I would give for overall air layer harvesting is to give it the best chance of possible to survive, so I'm at least following my own advice with this one. Wood tree sitting in its new pot on top of a layer of bonsai soil, and you'll also notice that I made use of the drainage hole on the bottom to tie some bonsai wire through and actually tie the tree into the pot. After that was done, I can come in with another layer of soil and start covering up the roots. Because of the uniform nature of the roots that the air layer produced, it was honestly a really easy repot. I still did a little bit of skewering with a bamboo chopstick, but the tree was already sitting nicely in its new pot. Next, it was time to give the tree its first restyling. This will also help the tree with its chance of survival, as less foliage will mean less stress on the root base as it continues to grow. So before I make any decisions, I just take a 360 view of the tree and start trying to think about, first of all, what I want to be the front of the tree, as well as which branches are crossing, which parts of the tree could be simplified, and then other things like that. But before we make any tough decisions, I went ahead and just plucked off some of the yellowing, dying leaves with my fingertips, and even just that action was enough to get us moving forwards with pruning. After cleaning up the bottom, the next obvious choice was to address the super long leader coming out of the right side of the tree. I cut it back to a more manageable length, and instantly the tree looked a lot more in scale. Giving the tree another 360, all the metaphorical low-hanging fruit had been taken care of, so it was time to start making some more difficult decisions about how I really wanted the tree to look in the future. But before then, I decided I should cut off the excess bonsai wire I used to tie the tree into the pot. I started out by thinning the lower left side of the tree. There were a couple branches that were pretty redundant, so I was able to give the tree a little bit more simplicity in its shape just by doing that. And then as you saw, I took the front portion off of the next lowest branch to clean up that side a little bit. With my attention now towards the top canopy of the tree, I began to thin that out a little bit, first with just my fingernail, and then ultimately a pair of scissors so I could take care of some of the more substantial branches. Already these cuts were giving me a lot more visibility to the dogwood's tree line, so I think I ended up making the right decisions. Here's the tree after its initial completed styling. It ended up turning out really well, but obviously it already had really nice movement, and that was the reason I selected it as a branch to make an air layer out of, so I can't really take credit for most of it, but I'm happy to enjoy it. Here's a close-up of the pot, and as you can see, there's still a lot of sphagnum moss sticking up out of the top. Maybe some of that will erode over time, but I'm sure a lot of it will have to be manually removed. After that, I just had to find a spot for it on the bonsai bench. I decided to hold off on posting this video for a few weeks so that I could add a follow-up segment and show how the tree is doing, and ultimately prove to you guys that this air layer actually did survive and the technique that I'm about to show you in the latter half of this video does work. So here we are back at the bonsai bench a few weeks later. You can see that not only has the old foliage that we kept on the Jamaican dogwood tree survived, but it's even beginning to push out some new foliage. I did this by making sure I kept the tree pretty heavily watered for the time being. As an air layer, the roots were used to being pretty much submerged in moisture 24/7, as well as the tree was also getting nutrient supplementation from the rest of the tree not being air layered. But now that it's been taken from the mother plant, it's probably wise to take extra care and make sure it's really thoroughly watered, at least for the next couple of months as it continues to grow more roots that are used to growing in soil and not used to growing in super wet sphagnum moss. Another thing I did to ensure the success of this tree is that I put it in a spot that gets dappled, partial sunlight at best. It's pretty easy to burn leaves on trees that aren't used to being in full sunlight, so couple that with a tree that also has a fairly new root system, and it's probably wise to just give it a little bit of shade for a while until it's able to get stronger. So now that I've shown you a successful air layer, how do you make one for yourself? I'll show you the super simple and easy process in just a few minutes on the Bahamian cherry tree bush that I have growing in the ground in my front yard. As you can see, it's really overgrown, so this is a good technique to not only trim back your plants, but also get new plants in the process. I take a look at the Bahamian cherry and the branching structure and decide that right about here is probably a good place to start an air layer. So I remove all existing vegetation and cut 2 rings around the bark, only penetrating the first layer of the tree. Then just peel or scrape off the first layer of that bark in between the 2 cuts that you made. It's important that you don't leave any of this bark remaining, because if you even leave a little bit of a sliver that connects to the rest of the tree, it's likely that the air layer will fail and it will actually just start to regrow its bark, as opposed to treat the limb as a brand new plant and start growing new roots for it. The next step in this process is to apply a generous amount of rooting hormone to the area that you just exposed on the tree. I use this Clonex brand, but you can use other brands or even natural variants like the inside of aloe vera plants. And then after the rooting hormone is applied, we can move on to the last step to get this air layer set up. You're going to need a medium that holds moisture really well, so I use sphagnum moss for this, and then 2, a plastic bag or Ziploc or something. Plastic, the reason for plastic is that it holds in the moisture extremely well. And then you're just going to want to tie this sphagnum moss filled bag around the outside of the cut that you made on your tree and then added the rooting hormone to. The seal doesn't have to be airtight, and I honestly think it might even be harmful if you somehow did manage to get it to be airtight, but it should be almost as tight as you can get it. The number one factor that's going to determine if your air layer succeeds or fails is how consistently moist it stays. So what I like to do, since I water a lot of my plants every single day, is just water the air layer like it's any other potted plant and give it a spray down every single day just to ensure that it's never going to dry out and those roots aren't going to die or potentially not form in the first place. So, those are the basics of air layering that I have for you guys. Hopefully you can go out into your own yards and start duplicating your plants and getting more smaller versions to mess around with. And as always, if you made it to the end, don't forget to like the video. And if you're not subscribed, I'd ask you to please consider hitting that subscribe button and coming back for more bonsai and also terrarium / fish keeping related content.